Hi, I'm Matt Stoller, author of monopoly-focused newsletter Big and an antitrust policy analyst. I have a great segment for you today on this big breakdown. It's about inflation, not just high prices, but something very different, fair prices. And there's actually some good news here from your government. When was the last time you heard that? So I want to start with an important announcement that you probably missed. Last week, the Biden administration proposed banning something called junk fees. Junk fees are hidden administrative charges or other sorts of fees tacked onto everything from concert tickets to apartment rentals. Here's the Today Show reporting on the announcement. Let's take a listen.
Welcome news for a lot of folks, Tom.
Everybody can relate to these, right? These are fees that are for services you might assume should be included at hotels, at resorts, at restaurants, concerts, you name it. And there's often no opting out, even if you don't want these fees. You don't want necessarily to use the bicycle. Well, the Federal Trade Commission says they are deceptive, they're prohibited, and now it's moving to ban junk fees and impose penalties on companies that charge those hidden fees.
Well, this isn't actually a new policy. It's just an expansion of something that the government has already been doing. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, for instance, has already cut things like bounce check fees by 86% and cut about $5.5 billion a year in junk fees by banks on things like overdraft charges. That's about $150 a year for each of the 33 million households that pay these charges. Okay. So why is the White House doing this? Well, aside from the fact that it's just a good idea and everybody hates them. Well, the good parts of the Biden administration, the antitrust enforcers and the bank regulators, have recognized that prices are out of control and that they're also unfair. And they've been trying to root out these nasty practices in the economy with some modest success. But these officials wouldn't be able to actually act without public support. And if you look at polling, the big problem voters fear and have feared for a couple of years is high prices. Inflation does seem to be coming down, but that doesn't mean that people are happy or even believe it. Let's take a look at some polling. Okay, so the top issue here is price. So this is just, there's lots of polling that says the same thing. The top issue is prices in general. The second is the cost of healthcare, and that's also price. So what is going on? There are two issues, both of which have to do with something pollsters and economists don't ask about, and that is fairness. People don't just care about the absolute level of price. We also don't like it when we're being cheated. And that brings me to the causes of the higher prices that we're experiencing. So for roughly a year after the pandemic, populist thinkers and writers posited the theory of what's called greedflation to describe why prices were skyrocketing. You guys heard a lot about this on Breaking Points. And at the time, it was pretty obvious why people were talking about this. CEOs were on investor calls, just saying it. They said they had pricing power, or their industry overall had disciplined its capacity. One CEO, for instance, even said publicly that he was praying for inflation so he could raise prices. Of course, the fact that CEOs were saying it outright didn't stop economists from mocking the theory into oblivion. So Larry Summers made fun of the idea of corporate power pushing up prices as quote unquote science denial. There's a lot of economists who said this kind of thing. It wasn't supply and demand lines, so it didn't matter. But a couple of antitrust cases over the last month are suggesting that concentration may have played a more significant role than commonly understood. But we just don't necessarily have the data to measure it. So 2 weeks ago, the Antitrust Division filed a complaint against a firm called AgriStats, which sells data and consulting services to the processors that dominate the poultry, pork, and turkey industries. The claim in the case is that AgriStats was a coordinator of pricing, serving as a clearinghouse where it would collect and share pricing, wage, and production data for all major meat packers. AgriStats then also sold consulting services, which one executive at Smithfield, which is a giant pork processor, summarized with 4 words, quote, "Just raise your price." There's even clip art. So this is from a sales presentation in 2016. You can look at the bottom, see that graphic? We're all pulling together, pulling for the arrow and the chart to go up. Teamwork. Now, the poultry, pork, and turkey industries aren't technically monopolies. as there are multiple firms who sell these products. But AgriStats, by making sure that everyone in the industry colluded, applied a form of unified control of pricing to the industry. It's multiple firms, but in one centralized quasi-cartel. And that kind of collusion is probably systemic across the economy. After all, AgriStats wasn't hiding its business. This is what it has on its website. It's marketing material that is pretty close to "we sell price fixing conspiracies." Right? And if they're just saying it outright, that means that it's a respected and legitimate form of business. But are there other examples? Yes. There's, for example, landlord software sold by a firm called RealPage. And essentially, this software recommends to landlords that they raise rents, and it shows them, quote, data RealPage gathers from clients, including private information on what nearby competitors charge. So a bunch of landlords that may seem like they're operating separately are in fact coordinated and centralized on price. And wherever you have a centralized software platform sharing pricing data in an industry, there's potential, and I would say even probable, collusion like this. But that's not the only way to price fix. So, for example, in a recently filed antitrust complaint against Amazon by the Federal Trade Commission, one of our antitrust enforcers, the government touched on something called Project Nessie. And this is an internal algorithm to, quote, test how much Amazon could raise prices in a way that competitors would follow, end quote. So Amazon would raise a price on, say, a TV to see if competitors followed. And then if competitors did raise prices, then they would keep the price high. They would keep the price high. But if competitors didn't follow, then Amazon would drop the price down if they didn't. So here, Amazon wasn't just hiking its own prices. It was signaling to rivals that they should hike their prices as well. Now, I suspect these forms of coordination are far more common than we assume, and they're not always nefarious. Sometimes they just kind of happen because of the centralization of software. Now, you might think the restaurant industry is competitive, and it is. Lots of different restaurants make different foods, charge different prices. But the payment software for restaurants is much less so. And when consumers are presented with a bill at a restaurant, the screen regularly offers not the traditional 15% tip, but the choice of tipping 20%, 22%, or 25%. Is that collusion? No. But it's a loosely coordinated form of a price hike, and it allows firms to pay employees less than they ordinarily would have to. And tipping is now being baked into all sorts of companies, from plant stores to locksmiths to appliance repair firms to juice shops. In fact, 16% of small businesses now ask customers to leave a tip, and that's up from 6% in 2019. That's almost triple. Again, this change is almost certainly a shift in the software that firms use to accept payments. And it's a price hike in a form of coordination you wouldn't necessarily see, or you won't see, in concentration statistics. Now, during the pandemic, this hidden form of consolidation likely boosted prices. So two scholars found that markups, which is the amount a firm sells a good or service over that good or service's cost, absolutely exploded. Let's take a look. So the increases in 2021 were both the highest level on record and the largest one-year increase, over 2.5 times the increase of the next several largest annual increases. So that's a cause of inflation. Price fixing and more coordination across the economy through software and data sharing. And corporate profits sort of bear this out. They skyrocketed during the pandemic, but they haven't come down. Now, as I showed earlier, some parts of the Biden administration are trying to take action on this problem with antitrust lawsuits. But that's not all. There is a second issue, which is the rise of what are known as junk fees. Now, as noted earlier, these are hidden or undisclosed fees that you get charged after you try to buy something. It's pretty common when you book a hotel and then you have to pay what's called an extra resort fee, like $25 just to stay at the hotel that they didn't tell you up front. Or you try to get a concert ticket and see extra fees that hike the price of a ticket by an average of 30 to 40%. Junk fees are the flip side of more consolidation and data sharing because they force prices up across the board. So typically, consumers will buy, say, a ticket or a hotel room based on a price comparison site. But these comparison sites don't show the included junk fees. So unscrupulous firms have an advantage because their prices actually look cheaper than they really are. So one competitor of Ticketmaster, for instance, told the government that larger ticket sellers gain, quote, a competitive advantage by omitting mandatory fees from the total cost of tickets in advertising and luring consumers with deceptively low prices, only to impose substantial back-end fees sometimes after customers provide payment information, end quote. We've all experienced these kinds of fees, nickel and diming. It hits us in different ways. Some of us, it's when we buy a ticket. Some of it's when you go on an airline. Some of us when we rent an apartment. But we've all been nickel and dimed, and it's really annoying. But the result of the consolidation and then the centralization, the ability of firms to charge these fees, and the incentive, even for honest firms to start doing it, because they'll be locked out of the market if they don't, is that junk fees are pervasive and they're getting worse. So Consumer Reports found that at least 85% of Americans have experienced a hidden or unexpected fee in the previous 2 years, and 96% found them highly annoying and said they were paying more now in surprise charges than they did 5 years ago. We're getting cheated a lot, and more than we were getting cheated 5 years ago. Now, a different group, not Consumer Reports, found that hidden fees are, quote, a prevalent problem related to internet apps, automobile rentals, communications companies, event ticket sellers, carpet cleaners, auto dealers, dietary supplement sellers, restaurants, airlines, moving companies, credit unions and banks, payday lenders, gyms, hotel and travel companies, outlet stores, sports betting, and online auctions. We've all experienced it. It's very annoying. We all hate being cheated. But I think these fees are actually having a really bad effect on us, far beyond the obnoxious nickel and diming and the amount that it costs us, which is substantial. Being cheated, and being cheated systemically, is not only frustrating, it's also scary, because it can recur without warning and cause unexpected costs. It's a loss of control over our economic fortune in a small way, but if it happens enough, you start to notice. Maybe your whole economic life is out of control. So this could be another part of the answer about why sentiments on the economy are so negative, despite evidence, in terms, some evidence, that there's less inflation, that there are more jobs. Pollsters are asking about inflation by framing it in terms of the increase of prices. And it's a fair question to ask. But you and me, we don't just want to pay good prices. We also want to feel like we are being treated fairly. We want to be able to plan. We want to be able to know that the price we see is the price that we have to pay. If people feel increasingly cheated, and the only questions they are asked by pollsters is whether the economy is good or whether inflation is up, I think they're going to give an answer that reflects their anger and fear of being taken advantage of, and not reflect the quote-unquote objective statistics that economists might expect them to echo. So now the Biden administration, or at least parts of it, are acting. So last year, the Federal Trade Commission, led by Chair Lina Khan, asked for public comments about junk fees and got 12,000 of them from people saying basically they hate, companies like Ticketmaster, Planet Fitness, whatever, the companies that cheat them. So this week, the commission put forward a draft rule that would, quote, ban businesses from charging hidden fees and require them to show the full price up front, require companies to disclose up front whether fees are refundable. So if the rule gets finalized, there will be no more surprise resort fees at checkout or unexpected service fees to buy a live event ticket. It'll apply to hotels, lodging, apartment rentals, car rentals, events, so on and so forth. But that's not all. There's another regulator, which is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and that's led by a guy named Rohit Chopra. They're forcing banks to provide basic information to consumers without charging fees. So, no more fees for basic services like checking bank account balances and obtaining a payoff amount for a loan or getting account information needed for applications. And later this month, the CFPB is also going to put forward a rule that should let you change bank accounts more easily, because it'll tell banks that they have to let you transfer your bank transaction data to another bank or financial services firm. So you'll be able to easily move banks and not have to redo all the auto pay stuff. So along with the antitrust cases, this is some reasonable stuff from your government. It's not nearly enough. It's the right direction, and it suggests that we actually can have a government that does good things if you have people there who want to and have the authority. Well, who opposes this action? Because it's always important to look at the opponents of something like this. If 96% find it very annoying, who's the other 4%? Well, of course, the firms themselves who make money from it don't like it. But that's not the real problem. right? Because they can just raise their prices if they want to and stop nickel and diming. The real opposition is coming from, as usual, economists. For thousands of years, political philosophers have wrestled with the problem of what's called just prices for goods and services. Every society regulated prices to get to fairness. You could go back to Babylon, you'll find it. There's stuff in the Bible about prices. Indeed, the Federal Trade Commission and many other areas of government have statutes that ban, quote, unfair methods of competition or unfair and deceptive pricing practices. Because fairness, not just the level, is something that makes a society function. Yet this concept of fairness, it offends economists who morally think only in terms of supply and demand curves, only in terms of efficiency, and generally oppose both antitrust action and rules around fair pricing. So one conservative economist actually said that fair is a, quote, four-letter word that should be expunged from economics. And this guy's actually very religious. Now, it's easy to look at politics and think the problem is politicians, Republicans and Democrats, they're always fighting, they're always lying, whatever it is. But the truth is, the main obstacle to a more fair society is not them. It's not our elected officials, who are often acting in more good faith than you would assume. The main obstacle to a fair society is economists. These are the unelected people who try to stop our elected leaders and appointed regulators from cracking down on firms engaged in price hikes. And they are the ones who are hostile to the idea of fairness and getting rid of these things like junk fees. For most of American history, believe it or not, we didn't really listen to economists, but we had a moral conception of what cheating and what open and fair markets meant. And while politics today often looks ugly, if you can look behind the bitter culture warring, you can see that that is where we're returning. So thanks for watching this big breakdown on the Breaking Points channel. If you'd like to know more about big business and how our economy really works, you can sign up by going to the link in the description below and signing up for my Market Power Focus newsletter, Big. So thanks and have a good one.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.